Sup fellow degenerates, it's your boy Rot and welcome back to the channel, though if you're new here then hi, hello, howdy-o, nice to have you. Today I'm going to be capping off the Phangoria OC Rundown series with a little Q&A. I may be doing some OC rundowns again in the future on Ratboy or Waylon when my friend Tem, the creator of them, is in the mood to help me write the video scripts, but for now this will probably be the last Phangoria related video for a while. If after this video you still have some questions about the universe, you can ask me about my OCs on Tumblr, which you can find linked in the card down below. Just a heads up, if you're unfamiliar with my work, Phantasmagoria, Phangoria for short, is the name of my OC universe. I'm a creepy, cute, and horror artist mainly, so a lot of my work tends to have a hefty amount of dark or uncomfortable themes, so keep that in mind if you decide to seek out my work in general. In this video, I'll just be answering a lot of different questions that people have about the universe, characters, how Phangoria was conceptualized, character relationships, designs, etc. I'll also be adding chapters to the video so that you can skip to a specific part if you want to hear about very specific types of questions. If an answer to a particular question might be triggering, then I'll say so before answering and provide a timestamp on screen to skip if the topic might be upsetting to you and you'd prefer to avoid it. Also, certain comments have multiple questions in them, so if I skip one while answering, it just means that I've already answered it or am planning to later in the video. Before I get into all the questions though, I would like to take a moment to thank Boning for being a member on Ko-Fi. If you're able to and want to support me monetarily, though no pressure if you don't have the money for that, then my Ko-Fi is down in the card link below. You could either make a one-time donation with a value of your choosing, or you could become a member for some extra perks such as commission discounts, access to my work in progress art, and the benefit of having your name featured in videos. My comms are also still open, so if you'd like to order a commission, then you can find my prices and terms on the commission terms page in my card. To order one, you just need to DM me on any one of my socials. With all the shameless self-promo out of the way, let's get into the questions, shall we? Heart of Art 7 asks, what inspired you to start Phangoria in the first place, / how did you get the idea? So, Phangoria actually came about after I designed the character of Vince specifically. I designed him a few months after Ophelia, who is no longer a part of the universe by the way, and because they looked quite similar in aesthetic, I decided to make a world for them and began creating other characters to go in it as well. The general dark themes behind Ophelia and Vince's characters were also what influenced the dark themes present in the world as a whole actually. Faranume1249 asks, what led you to the name and general environment / composition of Phangoria? The environments in Phangoria are basically just done up and exaggerated versions of real life, but the name of it took a little bit longer to come up with. It was called Unnamed World for a very long time until I settled on Phantasmagoria. My reasoning for choosing that as the name, besides Phantasmagoria just being one of my favorite words, is that the meaning of the word is imagined phantasms or dreamlike imagery. So to say something is phantasmagorical is to say that it's dreamlike and or similar to that of a hallucination. Dramalja asks, what is the story setting like? Anything special about the area / town? The main setting of Phangoria is actually Silicon Valley, California, and the story is currently locked in an unspecified modern time. Most of the characters live in different cities, like Arthur lives in Sunnyvale, Vince and Freddy live in Gilroy, Charlie lives in San Jose, Felix and Waylon and then Shiloh and Blair all live in Morgan Hill, and Ratboy lives in Fremont. The only characters that actually live away from the main cast are the Noir parents, Eric and Alana Noir, and then Vince's mom, Victoria. Floof aka Sofa asks, I'm not sure if there is information on this already, sorry if there is, but is Phangoria entirely based off of our real world, geography, current state, existing people, etc., with a different setting of species and original characters, or have you just taken inspiration from the real world? What are the major changes? Phangoria, yes, takes place in the modern day real world, though there are some world building changes here and there. Most of the differences have to do with the addition of ocean cities where a lot of marine monsters live, and some changes in modern day politics. The world building isn't really all that intensive, to be honest. Phangoria in general is much more about the characters doing wacky out-of-pocket horrible shit and less about the world around them. I've described it before as just people living out their 20s to the fullest, but in the worst way imaginable. Uzubi asks, do you ever plan on developing this story in a comic form? I've actually considered it very strongly. If I did, it would probably have to be 18+ maybe, considering the sexual content, but maybe I would censor it, I'm unsure. It would be a horror and black comedy, primarily focusing on episodic stuff, but there would be occasional character and story arcs, I think. NG Lark asks, what medium would you want to tell the story in? Comic, TV, or other? What, if any, differences are there between land cities and ocean cities? How does meat work in this universe? since there are plenty of humanoid animals, is everyone vegan? So first of all, I'd like to tell the story in comic form if I ever adapted it into anything. The main difference between land and ocean cities would be the infrastructure, I think, being that underwater buildings and systems would have to be built very differently in order to exist underwater. If I had to compare my mental image of them to anything, I'd say that it would probably be kind of similar to the underwater cities in BoJack Horseman, if you know what I'm talking about. As for the meat thing, meat works just like it does in the real world. Certain people are vegan and refuse to eat the meat of certain animals, like, I don't know, a cow beastkin might refuse to eat beef, for example. There's a lot of debate in in-world politics on the ethics of eating meat, I'd imagine, but the rule of thumb is that only actual feral animals are eaten, whereas beastkin are not. Beastkin are, by the way, the overall classification for humanoid animal characters like Freddy, just to let y'all know. So a couple people wanted to know what kind of species exist in Phangoria besides the ones that I've named. Phangoria is very open world when it comes to species. If you can dream it up, then it could be a species that exists. I like to limit it to monsters with humanoid intelligence and features, but other than that, pretty much any kind of weird monster could exist in universe. I think that it's really cool to keep things open because it gives me and, fan OC creators a lot of wiggle room when creating characters and concepts. Sueno asks, what's the most deadly species in Phangoria? Because there are so many species and subspecies, it's hard to name any single one, but of the species that have already been used to make characters, I would say that shifters would fall into the highly deadly category. Being that their main diet is human flesh and they can disguise themselves as humans when they hunt, they are quite dangerous. Bunny's Ghosty Soul asks, do the shifters have real forms, like Pennywise with his spider form? Also, are we allowed to relate to your characters, or does that make you uncomfortable? Not idolizing, just relating. Bro, is your S key broken or something? Anyways, yes. Shifters can look like anyone that they want, though they do have true forms, and they kind of look like eldritch demons. Most of them have lots of eyes, teeth, and usually exposed organs of some kind. Half-shifters are kind of special in the sense that they only have two forms, a humanoid form and then their true shifter form. As for the second question, yes. I don't know why people would think that I'd be upset with people simply relating to my characters. A lot of characters exist to be relatable and interesting, and mine are no different really. If you're specifically asking if you can kin them, then preferably not, but finding them relatable and personal is fine. The only problem I'd have with idolizing is if people are idolizing toxic relationships like the one between Vince and Arthur or Blair and Shiloh, or I guess if you're just idolizing and glorifying some of the wacky bad shit that those little cunts get up to, LMAO. Asar Glow asks, is there anything shifters can't change into? Yes, they can't change into things like inanimate objects or feral animals. Meliron asks, will we ever see humans? Yes, in fact you already have actually. Victoria Wankham, Vincent's mother, is actually a human. Alistair Thorne Hernandez 3244 asks, was Phangoria originally made to be Event Universe, or was it something else and then just turned into Event Universe? It was from the beginning actually supposed to be Event Universe, yes. Not just for me, but for others who can see and relate to the dark concepts and ideas presented in the writing. It exists almost like a sandbox or a dollhouse in which I, and others if they want to make fan content I guess, can play with the characters and make them do different things. It's a tool that I use to express myself in a healthy, non-self-destructive manner, and not somehow like a promotion or glorification of the dark shit that happens in it. This is why a lot of incredibly dark themes are highly exaggerated or are otherwise played off for laughs or for humor, because I personally cope with trauma and pain through humor, and I know that a lot of other people do too. Queen Novella 773 asks, are your characters' designs meant to have symbolism behind them, or do you just like the look? For instance, Frederica Stone's vitiligo, is it meant to have some kind of deeper meaning? Most of my character designs exist to be aesthetically pleasing, though they are also meant to communicate the personality of a character as well. Freddy's vitiligo and two-colored hair, for example, are character design aspects that exist to communicate that she's not just a rabbit beastkin, but that she's specifically a Harlequin rabbit. Other design aspects like her large eyes and teeth also further the rabbit idea, while her outfit is specifically inspired by classic Halloween costume kind of mafia boss attire. However, there are some more subtle symbolism elements to some of my character designs. For example, shape theory. Comparing Felix and Vince side by side, for example, Vince's features are sharp and angular to communicate that he's intense and threatening, whereas Felix's features are more round and soft to communicate innocence, calmness, and his good nature. So yes, a lot of character designs of mine are the way that they are to communicate several things: personality, occupation, species, and yes, just to be aesthetically pleasing. Though to be honest, I don't really think that I'm that great of a character designer in general, so some of my designs might be lacking here and there. Lola Rosie asks, what's the process of making characters for you? I have a whole video that goes into specifics about how I design my characters if you'd like a detailed explanation, but the TLDW is, take in a bunch of different sources of inspiration, consider the character's personality and their role in the story before you begin designing them, and then just draw and go for it. Ooh, I'm gonna butcher this one. Piss on Me Natalie 7345 asks, would you say you create the personality or the physical design first, or do you feel like that affects the process? Do you create the characters with a story in mind, or is it the other way around? So I always consider personality before I set out to physically designing a character. A character's design is not just a visual aesthetic thing, but is also a medium that exists to communicate the personality, occupation, vibes, and whatever else of a character. It's very important to me that the character's personality and design are cohesive. As for the story, that's a bit more flexible. I've designed characters both with and without the role in the story in mind first, and it has worked alright both ways. Alright, so Sugarwolf has a lot of questions, so I'm just gonna go down the list one by one. How were the character concepts created? The character concepts were all created by observing different things that I like, creating a character from it, and all that. It's kind of how I would design any character. My inspirations were things like music, other artists, aesthetics, and even personal life experiences. Besides Vince, because you talked about it in his rundown video, did any other characters change drastically from their first design? Not really, all of them stayed relatively consistent from their first concepts outside of Vince. Is there a character that, no matter what, felt like their design was that of a villain's? If you're asking which character designs I think are the most villainous, I'd say Blair and Arthur. Blair's triangle-shaped face, shark features, and sharp angles evoke explicitly demonic and villainous vibes, though their fluffy hair and formal getup could be charming and disarming, which is intentional. I would also say Arthur because, come on, he looks just like such a douche. Like, oh my god, look at that smarmy bastard. Vince, though you can tell something is off with him if you squint, could probably be confused as an uwu soft boy, but Blair and Arthur are more blatantly villain designs. Is there a character that you didn't mean to create that accidentally made into a full-on Phangoria OC? No, actually, all my characters were very intentional. Is there a character whose spark was not from being victims of terrible, awful people, or from being terrible, awful people, but something completely random? Most of them, actually. I mean, there were some like Vince, Blair, and Arthur who were intentionally designed to be awful people from the start, but most of the characters just sort of popped into existence as a visual design and personality, and their role as either a victim or a perpetrator was added later. Who's your least favorite character to draw? Probably Arthur, being that I often struggle with his facial structure. Who took the longest to design? Both of Tem's characters, Ratboy and Waylon, and Blair, just because I had to design all three with him, which means we both have to be involved and that just takes longer. Who would be the opposite of each character? Like, who would be the opposite of character X? Honestly, none of my characters would really be the opposite of one another. None of them are really narrative foils to each other. They're all just too hilarious and or specific to have opposites, to be honest. A couple people wanted to know who was the most fun to design, and the answer is probably Freddy, as she's one of the more elaborate designs that I did and is what I would call out of my comfort zone. She was the first fat character that I think I've ever made, and drawing and designing her body and her vitiligo was both good practice and really fun, and I think her turnout is gorgeous. Ooh, sorry if I butcher this one, but Delia Saldana 6850 asks, what inspired you to create each of the characters, and which one do you think has the best outfit? Though I already went over some of my inspirations, I will say that Shiloh is my favorite design-wise, and I like their outfit the most. This next question has to do with toxic, codependent relationship dynamics, stalking, coercion, and mutual obsession, so skip to the timestamp on screen if you'd like to not hear about it. Bunky Manjo, love the username, asks, what would you say the nature of Vincent and Arthur's relationship is? Is it on and off? One-sided? How do they feel about each other? Their relationship is honestly quite complicated. The whole thing started when Arthur briefly showed sexual interest in him by coercing him into a BJ. Vince instantly fell head over heels for him and began stalking him, insisting that they were in love and gonna get married, and then managing to dig up his home address and personal phone number online. He did definitely very normal things, like showing up to where he was in public, leaving dead animals on his doorstep, and blowing up his phone once or twice with texts and voicemails before getting his ass blocked. Arthur was wholly uninterested in any sort of romantic relationship with him at first, but admittedly was still quite attracted to him, so he tentatively reciprocated his advances in exchange for boning. He eventually found that it was kind of beneficial to use Vince to his advantage by manipulating his obsession with him, and decided that it was a lot easier than just getting a restraining order that, let's be honest, probably wouldn't do much. It's really one-sided in a lot of ways, as Vince is much more affectionate and intense than Arthur is, but though Arthur will contend that he doesn't really feel much about him at all, they do have a lot of chemistry, and Arthur goes out of his way to see him quite often. Eventually, both of them just become kind of possessive over each other in a very concerning, unhealthy way. Arthur begins to appreciate him not just for the boning, but because he can be the horrible, awful person he is around him without judgment. It's not what I would call love on either side of their relationship, actually. The whole thing just sort of devolves into mutual obsession. On Vince's end, he's extremely codependent, and on Arthur's end, there's this strong urge to control and own. So it's bad, but also kind of funny, because they're both terrible, so I feel bad for neither of them. These next two questions will be touching on the subject of domestic abuse, both spousal and parent-child, so skip to the timestamp on the screen if you'd like to avoid the discussion. DrawsFluff2169 asks, I've always wondered what's up with Vincent's mom and how did you come up with her? Vincent's mother, Victoria Wankham, is a really interesting character to me, though she's technically a side character and not a main one, but I'll still ramble anyways. One of her biggest descriptors is that she's a devout alt-right Christian conservative and believes strongly in traditional family values. Once married, Victoria embraced her role as a housewife and could be appropriately described as a highly neurotic neat freak down to the last detail. She's also a French-Canadian human woman who moved to Las Vegas with her husband Elliot after they married. Vegas is where their son Vincent was born. At the time, she was incredibly emotionally and mentally unstable and took her stress and pain out on her husband quite often. She never wanted to leave Canada and only moved at his insistence, and she felt really ripped away from her family. Her mental state declined further and her treatment of him worsened when his gambling addiction and infidelity spiraled out of control. It started with yelling and throwing things, but it progressed to slapping, name-calling, belittling, and other things. Elliot left home and disappeared when Vince was 11, effectively abandoning both of them. In the present day, Victoria, now 57, still lives in Vegas. She decided to stay mostly because of her job and her friends at one church there. Cottonball asks, what's Vincent's relationship with his mom? Not good! After Elliot left, Vince became the focus of Victoria's rage. She hit him, called him homophobic slurs. This was before he'd even come out as gay, by the way, and she just kind of called him things because of his effeminate behavior. Screamed at him and controlled every single facet of his life down to what he wore and how his hair was styled and colored. He wet the bed until he was 14, in fact, and every single time that she caught him, she'd grab him by the hair and shove his face in it before forcing him to clean it up himself. When he turned 18 and graduated high school, he left Vegas for California and hasn't seen or spoken to her since. He often pretends that she doesn't even exist or that he's never met her if asked, and a lot of his self-expression is very much rooted in defying her standards. So yeah, their relationship was awful when he was a kid, and as an adult, it's non-existent. Cherub Puppet asks, what's Arthur's relationship like with Charlotte? Do they get along at all? Arthur's relationship with both of his siblings is very rocky. Being that his siblings are both 14 years younger than him, he barely knew them at all when they were younger because he left home to pursue his education at only 18. As he's gotten older and has had more contact with his siblings, he and Charlie have ended up with incredibly bad blood. The main reason is that, unlike his other family members, he can't manipulate, charm, or shame her into doing what he wants her to do. She's not having his bullshit like ever LMAO. She reads him like an open book and is not afraid at all to tell him to shove it, and her assertiveness is what makes Arthur hate her so much. So no, they do not get along. They both utterly despise each other. Aster Geminis asks, who/what was Arthur's character inspired by? Arthur's character was actually heavily inspired by a lot of real-life billionaires who act shady with their money and business practices. He's essentially this farcical comment on how capitalist systems breed billionaire narcissists with no sense of morals or business ethics, though his behavior is over-dramatized for the sake of humor, of course. Other inspirations were the fictional characters Mark Beeks from the DuckTales 2017 reboot and Chris McLean from Total Drama. Stormy Day 829 asks, will Shiloh divorce Blair eventually? No. If I made a comic that had actual character arcs in it, then maybe, but being that the world is in a sort of stasis and kind of just exists for me to play around with dark concepts as a coping method, giving Shiloh a divorce arc would defeat the purpose of there being a permanent toxic relationship that I could explore. Though, if I did make it a comic, then there might be some sort of divorce arc. A couple people wanted to know who my favorite characters were, and that character is Vince, though Shiloh comes in a close second. The reasoning is just because Vince is hilarious to me, and Shiloh is the most personal to me. Jelly Rainbows asks, which character is your favorite to write, / which has your favorite story arc / storyline, etc.? My favorite characters to write dialogue for are Vince and Arthur, though Shiloh has the most interesting struggles, arc, and storyline to me. Varvaramir asks, do you think that you might add new characters at some point? Probably. I know Tem has a couple characters that are in development limbo at the moment, and I'll likely come up with some more in the future as well. Plus, there are already some really cool fan characters that I like, and I allow others to make AUs and fan content if they want, so more characters are likely. Encrypted Archivist asks, is there any music you associate with the story/world/characters? Yes, Vince and Arthur both have playlists with songs in them. As for specific artists and songs, I will say that I mostly listen to Aisha Erotica while thinking about Vince, Disillusioned by Moretu P when thinking about Shiloh, The Rapture But It's Pink by Scene Queen for Charlie, Work Bitch by Britney Spears for Arthur, and Go Hard by Krayshawn for Freddie. And finally, last question, Phobia930 asks, question, if you'd read this, but does all your characters represent a different thing you've experienced in your life or no? Most of them represent aspects of things that I have experienced in my life, but not all of them are direct life experience based. Shiloh is probably the closest to myself in experience overall, though I think a balanced mix of Charlie and Blair would probably have the closest personality to mine. And there you have it. Thank you all for watching if you got to the end of this video, rate and subscribe if you feel inclined to do so, maybe write a comment if you have any thoughts for me. Remember that all of my socials and my Ko-Fi are linked in the description if you want to support me. I still have commissions open if you're interested in ordering one as well. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will now bid you all adieu.